The videotape The videotape that you are about to see was recorded live during a Sunday class by Jetsunma Akun Lamo at Kunsongpil Choling. Jetsunma begins her classes with a brief teaching to the children of the center. We join Jetsunma now as she continues with the adult portion of the class.
Jeez. So now for the adult portion of our teaching. Oy. 2 weeks ago, we spoke a bit about the benefits and non-benefits of conventional wisdom. And we talked about that and tried to sort some of that out in our minds and tried to understand the very different, unconventional thought that sometimes we have to reevaluate conventional wisdom. That sometimes we have to look at things with different eyes and different standards, and we have to think things through perhaps differently than we've ever thought them through before. And that time is appropriate when we enter onto the spiritual path. Because as we enter onto the spiritual path, we actually see that there is a different criteria by which to understand the content of one's life. There is a different criteria by which to make decisions. It isn't to say that we toss out conventional wisdom as we have been handed it, as we have been taught it by our parents and their parents before them, and by society in general. But we should sift through all the messages that we have learned in our society. 2 weeks ago, just to recap, I talked about the fact that we were raised in a materialistic society. And so perhaps the goals in a materialistic society may be somewhat different from the goals that one really adheres to as one enters onto the path of Dharma. By way of explanation and as a foundational thought from which we can go on, I would like to say that I am not saying to you that suddenly the laws of the land should become invisible to you, that you should suddenly move from a socially responsible person to a socially irresponsible person. I am not saying that. You must understand, I'm not telling you that it's Bonnie and Clyde time, you know, that you can go out and rob a bank or do anything that you want to. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that as a materialistic society, we have goals that once we enter onto the path will change somewhat. And so it's from that point of view that we should think and reevaluate. For instance, much of our life, especially our young lives, is spent in preparation to have and collect. We don't realize that because it's so much a part of our lives. It is so deeply ingrained within us. It's kind of like being born on a merry-go-round. They say that if you were born on a merry-go-round, you would not know that you were going around in circles. It would be normal for you. Everything about you would be adjusted to that. Your mind, your perception, even your inner ear would be adjusted to that. However, if you stepped off of the merry-go-round, things would feel radically different. And we have that experience when we enter onto the path. The messages that we are given are so normal to us that they become invisible. And then as we enter onto the path, suddenly there is a great difference in our lives. And things have to be rethought and sometimes restructured. Now, what are the things that we use as guidelines? First of all, when we first enter onto the path, one of the foundational teachings that we study are the thoughts that turn the mind towards Dharma. These are an opportunity to stand outside of one's everyday life structure and look at life, look at our lives, look at our situations differently than how we looked at them before. The interesting, an interesting factor in our lives is that, excuse me, is that we find that there are so many factors in our lives that are completely unthought through, just completely invisible. We sort of move through our lives with our eyes shut. For instance, and we adapt. We are masters at adaptation. We are masters at adaptation. If we were as good at our practice as we are at adaptation and self-delusion, well, we wouldn't be sitting here. We'd be sitting on lotuses somewhere in a wonderful place. We are masters at adaptation. What happens is, let's say we reach the age of 30. Reach the age of 30. Of course, we look different than we did 10 years ago. And of course, we look different than we did 20 years ago. That much is obvious. But that information is, generally speaking, lost to us on a general basis. Oddly enough, then we reach 40, and it's even more lost to us. And why it's even more lost to us is because we try very hard not to think about this anymore, because we are actually seeing that we are experiencing the kinds of body changes that indicate to us the impermanence of our lives. It indicates to us that where at one point we were feeling the strength and force of coming up and coming to our adulthood, as young people we felt that we were always gaining in strength and competency and force. There comes the time in our adult life where we realize we are no longer getting stronger. Our life force is no longer increasing. Now it is beginning to move down. And we are constantly adjusting around that fact. The element of delusion there is also very strong. We move into midlife, and at midlife we are in denial about the fact that we are changing. And in fact, we think that what we have done then is to adjust in such a way that we are more comfortable with, but in fact we have adjusted in such a way as to make this impermanence invisible. Suddenly at 40 it takes us not 20 minutes to get ready, but 2, possibly 3 times that much to get ready. Whereas I remember in your 20s you put a little, you brush your hair, not even using a mirror, put a little Vaseline on your lips if you're a woman, just to make them all shiny, and brush your cheeks up a little bit, and you walk outside without any makeup and just look wonderful. And then at 40 you're doing all this stuff. And actually one of the teachers that is one of my root teachers, Jalcha Rinpoche, says that you should actually recognize that as a sign of impending death. Isn't that a charming thought? I thought about that this morning when I was getting ready. So that's a sign of impending death. But that's not how we think. We do not like to look at the impermanence of life. We like to experience a kind of delusion that is based on not looking at what goes before and what goes after. But in fact, that isn't what's happening. We are living in a state of fear. We are living in a state of denial. We are simply not facing the facts. We're not facing the facts, but we are not moving through them either. When we first approach the path, we learn these thoughts that turn the mind towards Dharma. That is, a respect for the fact that life is extremely impermanent. We are told that life is like a waterfall going downhill. And again, that's a perfect analogy, because we do see like that. In our normal deluded state, we do see like that. When we see a waterfall, it looks like the waterfall has been there since the beginning of time. We can even romanticize that. We can think, oh, this ancient waterfall, I'm only 40, 45, 50 years old, however old I am. This waterfall has been here for thousands of years. It's cut rivets through the rock. It's been here so long. But in fact, what they're talking about is if you took a cup of water and poured it from the top of the waterfall, how long do you think it would take to get down to the bottom of the waterfall? That is like the passage of our lives. Not the permanence or seeming permanence of an image of a waterfall. But the reality of the waterfall is that whatever moves through it very quickly. And that is like the content of our lives. And we don't realize that until we either meet with a life-threatening disease or a life-threatening situation, or until we actually, truly begin irrevocably to age, where it simply can't be fixed, try as we might. When that begins to happen, we begin to see that a little bit, but we actually spend most of our time and energy trying to cover it up. We are taught also that there are cause and effect relationships, that if we engage in virtuous, meritorious causes, we will have excellent, happy, and far-reaching results from that. We are also taught that if we engage in non-virtue, that is to say that if we harm or bring some damage to others, that eventually we will also experience the suffering of non-virtue. So these are thoughts that we have to think about for the first time in our lives. The consequences of thinking like that become very far-reaching if we do them well. Unfortunately, most practitioners practice by simply reading the teachings on impermanence, on cause and effect, on the conditions of samsaric existence, that is to say, the wheel of death and rebirth that we are engaged in, and it becomes a practice of memorization or simply recognition. We hear those teachings, we can probably repeat them back, but they don't really sink in. They don't really affect us on a deep level. The challenge here is to actually take our lives and reevaluate them according to the Buddha's teachings. This is a very difficult and very challenging thing to do, particularly for people who have been brought up to value a materialistic society in the way that we do. For instance, if we spend a good portion of our lives, some people spend a good third of their lives educating themselves in preparation, and many people spend more than that. There are people who are chronically educating themselves in preparation for what, I don't know, but chronically educating themselves. We may spend a third of our lives in education. We may spend a third of our lives climbing the ladder, just climbing the ladder. Until very recently, that was something that was given very strongly to the men in our society. The men in our society were given the wonderful job of being responsible for supporting everyone and everything. So your job, of course, as a male, was to prepare yourself to be extremely competent, don't look back, don't think, value yourself through how much money you can bring in. That's what the men are taught. And now, of course, women also have the same kind of responsibility. It isn't the way it was before, it's more equal. However, even in the case where one is not thinking about so much in terms of earning or money, there are still many other elements of our lives that are materialistic, having more to do with collecting and more to do with how our society views happiness. For instance, in our society, it is known, it is a fact, according to the powers that be, that one cannot possibly be happy without a gorgeous home and a new car. It simply isn't done. One has to have these things. We are told that you've got to have, you must have, I mean, just nobody doesn't have a color TV. Nobody doesn't have that. In fact, we have several. Possibly one for every room, maybe even in the bathroom. Heaven forbid we should go to the bathroom without something to do. So we have all these distractions and things that we pin as out there that we need to make us happy. And of course, as life goes on, we become increasingly less and less happy. It actually works to the opposite. We end up that we have to work very hard to own, care for, support, and deal with these things that we have collected. And that becomes a great deal of the content of our lives. We cannot go through the profound spiritual changes that we want and need to go through because we have the mortgage. That's our excuse. Or because we have to pay for those color TVs. We have to get that new car, pay for the other one. So there are many changes that we literally cannot make because of our responsibilities. Now, understand, I am not saying that you should throw everything out and go live in a tent somewhere. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying it is time to pull back and reevaluate some things about our lives. One of the ways that you might reevaluate your life is to look and see what the point of life is. Let's backtrack and think about this a little bit. Let's say you had something really important to do on Wednesday. Wednesday, you had something really important to do. It's unusual for you to do this. It takes some preparation. Your mind is geared towards that thing you have to do on Wednesday. You know how that is. Let's say Wednesday you have to give a presentation of some sort associated with your work or something that is very important to you and upholds the stature of your life. So Wednesday's a big day. You know how that is. You think about Wednesday every day. You know, you wake up and it's on your mind. You go to sleep. It's hard to sleep because it's on your mind. These are things that we consider and weigh very heavily. Let's say that you prepare very strongly for Wednesday. You've done all your preparation. You've done all your legwork, all your book work. You've got everything memorized. You've got everything all thought through. You are very, very well trained and prepared for Wednesday. You prepare for Wednesday additionally by going to bed early on Tuesday night and making sure you have enough sleep. You wake up Wednesday, you have a very good breakfast. You pick out your clothing very carefully. Everything is done very, very carefully. You're all set up, and then you go to your work day, and you have your presentation. Normally, the presentation is not as good as you would want it to be, and not as bad as it might have been. That's kind of how it always works out, isn't it? I mean, whatever ideas we had beforehand, that is usually the result we walk away with. And then at the end of Wednesday, Wednesday is over. What of Wednesday do we carry into Thursday? Well, of course, it depends on the situation of your life. In some cases, Wednesday may set up Thursday and all the additional days for the rest of your life. But in some days, Wednesday, but in some situations, the Wednesday activity may have relatively little consequence for all that preparation that was done. If you knew that, if you could really get a perspective on the fact that no matter how much you prepare, it's probably going to be worse than you thought and better than it might have been, and it's not going to have really that much impact on the rest of your life. If you knew that, don't you think you'd be less tense about moving towards Wednesday? Don't you think you would have maybe taken it in stride a little bit more? Don't you think you would have been a little bit more spacious in your mind? Don't you think if you had those facts ahead of time or remembered that that's how things usually turn out, that maybe you might pull back and just get some perspective? Well, that's what we're talking about here. If we actually look at our lives as that day, that very important day, that day that we prepare for, that day that we look forward to, that day that we dread, that day that we try to build ourselves up for, psych ourselves up for, prepare ourselves for, move everything out of the way for, let's say that our lives are like that. It's a big day. It's a big day. Unfortunately, like with that Wednesday, we may not have all the facts to give us the proper perspective. We don't really know how to take things. We may not have all the information that we need. According to the Buddhist idea, the things that we do during the course of our lives may be actually less important than we think. But there are some elements of activities that we engage in during the course of our lives that, although they may seem insignificant, may have more importance than we can possibly imagine. And it's for us to pull back and reconfigure, distinguish between what is important and what is only relatively so. This spiritual discrimination is a talent that in the beginning of entering onto our spiritual path is non-existent. As we move into our spiritual path is extremely rare. As we move further into our spiritual path, it becomes only slightly less rare. It is a quality that even advanced spiritual practitioners may not have mastered. So that it behooves all of us to really think this through. We have to look at our lives as being vehicles for what is most potent to accomplish the twofold purpose, which is the purpose of self and the purpose of others. The purpose of self and purpose of others can be understood in this way: to be perfectly equal. That is to say that while I may think that formally I am the most important person in the world, since I am me, and I am the body that I am living in, and this is my head, Now, having studied the Buddha's teachings, I find that in fact all sentient beings are equal. Absolutely equal. That even the cockroach has within it the Buddha seed, the same Buddha seed that I have. That Buddha seed which once one attains a state of perfect awakening is the nature, is the primordial nature. That even within the context of the human realm, we think about poor people as being down here and rich people as being up here, and we think about people having different religions and different ethnic backgrounds, different skin color, and yet according to the Buddha's teachings, there are no such divisions, none whatsoever. There are no gender divisions, there are no racial divisions, there are no ethnic divisions, and there are no money divisions, no status divisions. None of these things exist from the view of the practice of Buddhism. So much of what we have thought about and accomplished during the course of our life has to be changed. We have to pull back and rethink. Let's say as well that we are trying to determine what sort of values we should have, what sort of activity we should gain competence in. In order to do that, once again, we have to really look at what our lives are about. According to the Buddha's teaching, our lives are actually like a day in the week, or a day in the month, or a day in the year. And even while we are experiencing lives that seem to be the sum total of everything we know, we literally have no other experience other than the life experience we are having now. So to us it is all pervasive. It has literally no beginning and no end. It's like being born on a merry-go-round. We can't tell. We can't feel it. We cannot feel the impermanence of our lives, except as we begin to really age. But even then, we find ways to circumvent that. We cannot seem to distinguish the impermanence of our lives. So we treat our lives as though the experience that we were having right now had no cause and no effect. As though we are experiencing something that has no continuum. And yet we chronically act as though we were in a continuum, but we also act and think as though we weren't seeing it. It's very strange. We are very odd people. According to the Buddha's teaching, however, this life experience has causes that are ripening in it right now that were begun many, many lifetimes, uncountable lifetimes before. The very experiences that we are having now in our lifetimes, we may not have caused during the course of this lifetime. We probably will have created the causes for this lifetime previously. The Buddha teaches us that we have been born uncountable times, not 10 like the corner psychic will tell you, or 100, and you were probably not Nefertiti or King Tut or one of those guys. They've all been found by the corner psychic, and there's been at least 20 to 30 to 40 of them so far recognized on the earth. I know I was told that I was Nefertiti. Not true, I was Estee Lauder. No, she's still alive. Nefertiti, can you believe it? So, within the context of our lives, we have to think of our life as being a day or something impermanent, an experience that has an impermanent quality to it. We have to think about it that way. We also have to think about the fact that at the end of our life is the most significant moment in our whole life. Now, we don't want to think about that. We can't think about that. We're not capable of thinking about that. Because if we thought about that in that way, we would always be thinking about the end of our life as though it were that Wednesday. We wouldn't even live until the end of our lives. We would be constantly projecting into the future, which is a problem we have anyway. None of us knows how to live in the present moment as it is. So we would constantly be projecting to this time, but perhaps there would be no result. Perhaps we would not know how to think about it. So let's look at how to think about the end of our lives and why it is the most precious and important moment. According to the Buddha's teachings, nothing that we have done during the course of our lives on an ordinary level can be of any benefit at the end of our lives. Our experience of going through our lives literally ends up to be, according to the Buddha's teaching, like going to a continent filled with precious jewels and coming back empty-handed. Now that's a buzzword, and I actually think that as Buddhism moves into America, we have to lose that is a buzz phrase. We have to lose the buzz phrases because that doesn't mean much to us. Going to a continent filled with precious jewels, coming back empty-handed. You know, in America, there's jewelry stores everywhere. What do we care? We'll just buy something else. We don't care about that. So that doesn't really work for us. So here's how we have to think about the Buddha's teachings. We have to think about it deeply and personally. You have to have a personal relationship with this kind of thought. You cannot rely on the buzz phrases, the buzzwords in the books. To understand our lives as Westerners, we have to think, something we are deeply opposed to doing when it challenges anything that we are comfortable with. And we know that we are comfortable with our status quo. Now, it's like our middle names. I know for me, it is Elise Status Quo Zealy Jones. That's my name, my real name. What's yours? Status quo's in the middle there, isn't it? So we don't like to think that way, but now we have to come to terms with what our lives are about. At the end of our lives, what do we take with us? Not one teeny bit, not a fiber, of course, of anything material that we have gained. Nothing material that we have gained has any value. The only thing that we take into our next life, into our after-death experience, is if you're taking notes, write this down. If you're not, print it on the inside of your eyeballs so that you're always seeing it. We take into our next lives habitual tendencies. Habitual tendencies. The very things that are driving you crazy now are going to continue to drive you crazy in the future. At the moment of our death, as the elements dissolve and the consciousness moves through the Bardo experience, at that time we actually see the very display of our habitual tendencies. As we experience the death experience, and the initial experience of death actually occurs, the very moment of death where first the outer breath and then the inner breath ceases, at that moment the physical constituents dissolve, the elements dissolve, and they come apart from one another where they were coherent and cohesive before. At that moment we actually experience our natural primordial awakened state. But because our habitual tendency is that of delusion, we do not see it. It's just like now. There is no reason other than our habitual tendency, the karma that we have accrued, why we cannot abide spontaneously in the primordial wisdom state. There's no reason. There's not a wall keeping you out. There's not a sentence that someone outside of you has laid on you saying you can't have this till you get to heaven. There's no purgatory or anything that you have to go through. There's no reason why you cannot experience the precious awakening other than the habitual tendency of the mind and the cause and effect relationships that we have brought about through habitual tendency. So that's what we die with. When we are taught according to the Buddha's teachings that we die alone, that's what's meant. You can have millions of people around you singing you into the great beyond, all dressed in white and swaying gently. And still, you will die alone, and that's what that means. At the moment of death, you will only be able to experience your own habitual tendency. So if your habitual tendency was to get at the expense of everyone around you and call that winning, if your habitual tendency is to compete to be on top, if your habitual tendency is that materialistic, that is the tendency that you will go into the Bardo experience with. Not the money you made, not the clothes you bought, not the car you had. Nobody drives into the Bardo. And let's say during the course of your life, you manage to get involved with the upper crusty of society. Let's say you manage to get socially acceptable. I come from Brooklyn. That's never going to happen to me, you know. But anyway, you manage to get socially acceptable. Let's say you learn how to, you learn which fork to use, and you got the little tiny teacup thing worked out real well, and napkin on the lap, the whole thing. You can elocute well. Another talent I haven't managed yet. And you're a debutante or whatever it is that people do. I don't know what people do. I'm an Italian from Brooklyn. What do I know? So let's say you manage all of these things and you are just up there with the upper crust. Well, when you go into your next rebirth, do you think there's a special, into your Bardo experience, do you think there's a special Bardo for you? Do you think it's like color coordinated? It has all the proper music, everything's just right, it's also, and all the best people are there. Do you think it's like that? Dream on, my friend. The effort that you have put into attaining that stature during the course of your life will be applauded by the members of your society around you. You will probably receive accolade for that. You dress well, you talk well, you went to school a long time, you did all the right things. So maybe you're going to get an occasional smile from the people around you. By the way, when you turn around, they're stabbing you in the back so they can get into your position, but we won't talk about that. Let's say that you get that kind of approval. Well, when you go into the Bardo, what do you think you will get then? All you will have is the habit of your mind. If the habit of your mind is to simply push on ahead, to gratify yourself by doing everything and anything you can to get the approval of others, to think of yourself as higher by thinking of others as inferior, to create that kind of idea where there is superior and there is inferior in our society, the habit of that is what you will carry into your Bardo experience. The habit of prejudice, of selfishness and self-cherishing, of judgment, of hatred, of lack of generosity. And the next experience that you have in the Bardo and in the life experience to come will be influenced by those mental habitual tendencies, by those habits. That is the currency that you will carry into your next experience. So the Buddha teaches us that we should think of this life not so much as the be-all and end-all experience and opportunity for self-gratification, which is really what most of us do, even on our spiritual path. We think primarily in terms of self-gratification, even on the spiritual path, thinking, do I have all the nice, am I wearing the right clothes? Do I have the right books? Do I have everything set up nice? Do I look good when I do it? Does everybody think it's cool to be a Buddhist? Are you all looking? Is anyone out there? No. This kind of idea, this kind of self-cherishing, even if you practice that way as a Buddhist, it is that habit that you will bring into your next incarnation, that you will bring into your Bardo experience. We have to develop the skill of realizing that this life should be considered like a tool, like an instrument for profound practice. Because we are now creating the causes for either future happiness or future unhappiness. That's what we are doing now. Now, in order to understand how to create those causes, we have to look at the difference between temporary and ultimate happiness, temporary and ultimate result. Let's say, for instance, that, let's see, how can I say? All right, let's use the analogy of going to school. If we were to think about our going to school, let's say we had the self-discipline to want to do a really good job about going to school. We want to study. We want to actually go into there with a positive attitude. We want to study, do all of our assignments, try to do them on time, do a good job, really get into the schoolwork, and try to benefit from it and try to turn it over into something usable in our lives. Now, in our materialistic society, that's a good thing. And, you know, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's pretty good. It's good. Pretty good. But let's think about reality for a minute, shall we? If we do all that, the benefit that we receive from that kind of effort is ordinary. It has a definite birth and a definite death. It can clearly be seen that if you put effort into your schooling, there will be a good result, good education, that sort of thing. And there will be some benefit during the course of your life. I'm not saying don't go to school. I'm not saying don't send your kids to school. I'm saying get some perspective. There will be benefit. There is something there of value. However, if you're looking at the true value of this life, the actual coinage of this life, when you get ready to cash it in at the end, the only thing that you'll be able to take from an experience like that is the habit of being able to apply yourself in a disciplined way toward a goal. There's a habit there. Every time that you do something like that, you increase the weight of the habit of being able to bring something from beginning to completion in a determined and clear-thinking way. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But you don't take the actual education into your afterlife experience, you see? Let's say you went to school to be a doctor. Let's use that as an example. I'm just trying to give you ways to distinguish what's important in your life and what's not. Let's say you decide you want to be a doctor. So you go to school for, how many years does it take to be a doctor? Anyone know? 9 years, that's after what? After your bachelor's degree, right? No. Including the bachelor's? More like 12, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So it's more like 12. Let's think in terms of 12 years. If you go all that time to school, you know, if you were to engage in that kind of a program, so much of you would be invested in that. You know, if any of you are familiar with people that have gone to med school or have engaged in that particular track, it is a commitment beyond just horrendous commitment, and it's just constant. When they get to the end of their lives, they will have completed that course of education. They will have contributed to the healing of many others. They might have contributed to the death of many others. That is also a real possibility. And in many cases, in many other patients, they might not contribute or have a bad effect. Either way, that also I've seen. And at the end of their lives, they will have had perhaps a lot of financial gain, social status. Those are the things that they will experience during the course of their lives, but it has a very finite quality to it because at the end of their lives, nothing about the medical education will go into the next life. Now, this is a popular misconception. I've talked to people who have a particular idea about reincarnation and what that's like. They think, oh, well, if I'm a great healer in this life, surely I'll be a great healer in the next life. That isn't the way it happens according to the Buddha's teachings. In fact, the Buddha doesn't even teach that we, as a growing soul, as though we were becoming stronger and stronger like weightlifters, continue through a reincarnation experience. That's not even what the Buddha teaches. The Buddha teaches that we experience birth, rebirth, and rebirth again because of one cause and one cause only, the force of our craving. and desire, until we achieve realization. And then the birth becomes a display of our compassionate concern for sentient beings. Until that point, and that is a very different point from what sentient beings are experiencing now. We are experiencing rebirth due to the force of our craving. So if we are to accomplish all of these things during the course of our lives, don't think that because of that we're simply putting money in the bank regardless of what it is that we've accumulated, that everything that we have accumulated during the course of this life will somehow magically appear in the next. The life that I've described, the life as a doctor, will probably be like this. At the end of life, there's nothing that you have actually accomplished in a real way that you can take with you. Not the capacity to treat others medically, not the education, nothing, not the car, not the golf course that you are a member of, nothing, none of that. The only thing that will move with you into your next life is whatever merit you may have accumulated by having an altruistic desire to help others, and then by actually causing some healing. Now, you must understand, however, that those people you have healed will only get sick again. The people that you have healed, let's say you're a doctor and you take out someone's appendix, well, they're going to come down with something else after a while. Sickness is a condition of humanity. It is not something that can actually be fixed. It will always reappear, and it is due to the force of our karma. So even if you were a doctor and engaged in healing, you have not been able to cause any real changes. There are no lasting, truly beneficial changes. Again, this is a different perspective than you would ordinarily look at. If I had a ruptured appendix and you, the doctor, took out my appendix, I would be very grateful, of course. But if I were to step back and get a better perspective, I would realize that, in fact, nothing has changed. Nothing has really changed. The causes that created my sickness have not been dealt with. They will create future sickness. And the good that you have given me through treating me was very temporary, very temporary. The only thing then that is of value of that whole life, which was so effortful at the time of one's death, is any feeling of altruism that we might have had that brought us to the decision to treat others medically, and the rather, unfortunately, minimal good karma of having brought about some temporary benefit. That's a scary thought. To create that, and it's so real that we spend our whole lives engaged in activity that at the end of our lives brings very little result. Even in terms of the heroics that we experience during the course of our lives, and many of us live very seemingly heroic lives. I know of cases where people stay, for instance, in bad marriages. I mean, really bad marriages. We're talking totally hideous marriages, where they have to make a lot of sacrifices, such as the sacrifice of having a path to practice. Perhaps within the context of one's marriage, that is not acceptable. And so we go the conventional wisdom way of keeping the family together, keeping the marriage together, and we abandon the spiritual path. Now, your neighbors, your family, will give you a lot of praise and accolade for that. You have made the personal sacrifice to keep together the ah-ooh-ah family. You know, that's when the angels start singing. Ah-ooh-ah. In fact, Lord Buddha, actually, as I taught about 2 weeks ago, his story was a little bit different. He left his wife and child in order to bring about the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. There's a teaching in that. I'm not saying I do not honor the tradition of marriage or the sanctity of family. I am very much the family person. But I will tell you that when the choice hits me, I know which one to make. And I always have, and I always will. I will always make the choice that favors the ultimate benefit of oneself and sentient beings equally. These are hard things to think about. We're talking about a very courageous, individual, scary way of thinking and living. To separate out what is of temporary material benefit and what is of ultimate and profound benefit is very difficult. Let's say, however, that there is a different kind of life that is experienced. Let's say that a person grows up and looks around and says, there's a lot of suffering here. I mean, there's suffering everywhere. I see my parents suffering. I see the people around me suffering, the neighbors. I read the newspaper. I see suffering, suffering, suffering. There's no end to it. Well, you might think, what can I do? You might think, if you have some altruism, hopefully that there's some compassion, some altruism in you. You might think to yourself, what can I do? So you might examine the suffering. Where's the suffering come from? Well, it looks like some people suffer from physical causes. Some people suffer from mental causes. Some people suffer from material lack. Some people suffer because they are living in war, a war zone, let's say. There are many seemingly apparent causes of suffering. But let's say you were able to boil them all down and you see that at the root of them, of each and every one of them, the suffering is actually spiritual. That in fact, exactly as the Buddha has taught, all sentient beings are suffering, and they are all suffering for the same reason. They all wish to be happy, but they do not know how to create the causes of happiness. This is the truth that the Buddha has taught. This is true about you. You are hardworking. You are competent. You are trying feverishly to do the right thing with your life. Whether you succeed or fail, I don't know. But you are trying. You cannot say about Westerners that we are not trying hard to do what it seems like is the right thing to do. But let's say you discover for yourself that the suffering is actually spiritual. Well, what would you do about that? If you looked and you saw that the suffering was so all-pervasive as to be literally everywhere, that even oneself does not have the capacity to escape the suffering of old age, sickness, and death, and the other associated sufferings that we find in samsaric existence, the wheel of death and rebirth. Let's say that we really, we want to solve this problem. We are crying because we see that there's so much hatred in the world, there's so much bigotry, there's so much selfishness, there's so much horror in the world. We want to get to the bottom line and cut it. So we want to cut it from the root. We want to cut it from the angle of where the suffering actually is, from the spiritual level. And so we decide from that point on that we wish to bring spiritual relief, spiritual nurturing to others. Let's say we decide that at all costs, and that's our brave new phrase, at all costs, we will turn this life into a perfect vehicle by which the end of suffering will come about. Now, for the Buddha, that meant walking away from what kept him limited in a limited life that could only bring about limited result. As a prince, as a father, as a husband, he could bring about limited result to a limited kingdom. But could he actually bring about the end of suffering in that way? No, he could not. He could not. So he made a choice to do what was frowned on, and in it, it seemed as though he lost everything. He lost the connection with, love and respect and support of his family. He lost the approval of his family, and even had to suffer the disappointment of his family. They thought that he had let them down. He had to suffer the loss of his beautiful wife that he loved dearly, of his beautiful child that he also loved dearly. And yet, what was the gain? Because of his gift, many have come to fruition. Many uncountable beings have practiced the Dharma, attained the rainbow body, and have been brought to full liberation because of his life, one tiny life. And what about the life that preceded his life as the Buddha? The story is that he was reborn as a tiger. Can you imagine? A tiger. And that he actually gave his life to nurture others, gave his body, his blood, to nurture others. Ripped himself open and gave his blood. That sounds like a dumb thing to do, doesn't it? I mean, how can you preserve your own life when you're just ripping yourself open and giving it to others? Just think about that. Isn't that a horrible thought? So from the ordinary point of view, it looks like he destroyed himself. That looks like a really dumb way to live. Well, dumb way to die, anyway. What was he thinking? He was thinking that to bring about the liberation and salvation of others through having a final, complete, and irrevocable commitment to benefit sentient beings. That was the way. Think about that. To know that that is the only way to bring happiness, the only way to actually attain happiness. And so, because of the generosity of having given his life to nurture others, to be a being who would lay down his life to feed others, made it possible for him to achieve the final realization of Buddhahood. Was it a good investment, do you think? I would say so. Did it bring about his ultimate happiness? It brought about his ultimate liberation. It also brought about my happiness. Whatever happiness I have managed to come to due to the force of my practice, I owe to his decision to give his life to benefit others. Not conventional wisdom. That is not what we are taught to do. How interesting that things aren't the way we thought they were at all. Not at all. How far do we have to go in our lives before we realize that? So much of what we do actually brings about future unhappiness. So much of what we are taught to do in terms of self-aggrandizement, self-treasuring, self-preservation, only increases the habit of self-cherishing, self-absorption, lack of regard for the welfare of others, so that ultimately we have no habit for kindness and no hope for realization. Because it is only through the awakening of the precious bodhicitta, the precious view of compassionate activity, that happiness can be brought about, that realization can actually happen. And so all of the things that we do to preserve our lives, to benefit ourselves, actually bring about more suffering, a longer stint in samsara. When we come to the path, we find out that everything we have come to trust and know has changed. It's different than what we thought. To be that brave, to carry that thought, to work with it, to really examine it closely, to change our lives accordingly, is a terrifying prospect. but it must be done. To not do that is like trying to drive down an unlit road with your headlights off. You are going to crash. There's no way, being as though there's so much traffic around you, there's no way they're not going to crash. One must turn on the lights and see what the result of one's life actually will be. Ideally, our life would be spent bringing about ultimate result, lasting result. That is to say, the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. To do that, one must prepare. As we are now, as ordinary sentient beings, we really don't have the preparation to bring about the ultimate welfare of others. We only have the ordinary, temporary view. We haven't studied enough, we haven't practiced, we haven't come to realization ourselves. So we cannot lead others to realization. So the first step that must be done for the benefit of others is to practice our practice in order to prepare ourselves. The investment in our lives as practice vehicles to transform our lives into a vehicle for practice. This is the first goal for the practitioner, and it takes more courage possibly than we have ever had in our lives before. It is a terrifying prime prospect. We have accumulated all kinds of different competencies. We have street smarts, we have savvy, we have chic, we have academic smarts, we have common sense. Well, some of us. It's almost as rare as Buddhahood, you know. We have so many different talents. But supposing we were to come to the point in our life where we realized that it is absolutely the determination to engage in compassionate activity for the welfare of sentient beings, that this is the only skill worth having, that determination to create that habit, to transform our lives into this perfect vehicle by which ultimate benefit will be brought about, the benefit of the liberation of others. How difficult it is, and no one knows this better than we do, and certainly I know it, to deep six all of the capabilities and qualities that we have worked so hard to develop in order to attain the greater view of a compassionate life. It's probably the hardest thing we've ever done. To look at the things that we hold, the pretty things, the gizmos, you know, the things that we've collected that we can now afford, and to look at them and realize they are basically completely indistinguishable from shit. That in this case, it is absolutely the truth that chocolate and shit weigh the same. To look at that and just let go of it when you've put so much investment into it, so much time, to have that kind of courage. Or as they say in my neck of the woods, the chutzpah. To really see that for what it is, just the baubles of samsaric existence, and to go within to this place that is not mapped out, completely unfamiliar to us, where our first steps will be clumsy, they will be like baby steps, we will be unknowing, we will be uncertain, and there's no proof. But on the base of those who have crossed the ocean of suffering, like Lord Buddha, to understand that now we are going into this wild, uncharted territory. To be that brave, to have that kind of courage, to be able to withstand even the loss of the approval from fulfilling all the programming that you have been given. that may be the most frightening thing that you have ever done. And yet I'll tell you that for the spiritual aspirant, it is the way. What is it about your life that will have to change? Well, I can't say. I'm sitting over here and you're over there in your life. You have to examine. You have to know. But I can tell you what the first thing on your list is of things that will change. It will be you. Much more than any of the props of your life, much more than any of the relationships in your life, it will be you that must change. It's as though you have to step off of a track that is like a well-beaten path. Cows and pigs and dogs have been traveling this path. Oxen and yaks and everything imaginable have been traveling this path to where this path is so well worn. It just looks like the way to go, boy. It just looks so easy to walk down that path. It is so easy to lose yourself in the oblivion and safety of ordinariness, isn't it? It's just so easy to roll down that track. But instead of doing that, we have to pick our way along this ridge that is frightening to us. But it's the only path that leads to the top of that mountain. What is it about your life that has to change? I don't know. You know your life better than I do. As a spiritual aspirant, we come to the point where we must examine our lives and see what parts of our lives, what parts of our minds are not conducive to spiritual practice, to creating a life that is actually a vehicle for realization. What has to be ejected from your life and what has to be brought on board so that when you come to the end of your life and move into the bardo, you do so without fear, knowing that to the best of your ability you have filled your life and your mind with kindness, that you have practiced in order to bring about the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings, that you have followed the supreme method that leads to the exit away from self-cherishing, away from non-virtue, away from desire, and that you have truly entered onto the path by which all suffering will end. The person who dies, who enters into the bardo, with that information in their heart will die well. They will enter into the bardo in a peaceful, spacious, and relaxed way, without fear. If they have practiced and meditated well, when the constituents of their former samsaric existence begin to dissolve, and the primordial nature arises naturally as clear light, perhaps they will recognize that nature. Because rather than looking at the star of materialism and self-aggrandizement, they have followed the light of primordial view. So perhaps when that light appears for them in the bardo, they will know its nature. Choices. You make them every day, every hour, every moment. For most sentient beings, they are choices that go either way. Some of them might be pretty good. You might do something nice for somebody. This wonderful lady brought me some flowers, a collection of autumn things here. That's an offering made to the three precious jewels. Good choice. Good choice. Well, here's another choice you could make. You could sit here listening to this class and say, I don't care what she says. I'm going to do what I want to anyway, because I'm having fun. You could say that. That would be a bad choice, just to give you an indication. These choices are, every one of them, an opportunity. Every one of them are as precious, any time that you can make a choice, they are as precious as your Dharma books, as your texts. They are precious, precious moments. And each one of them can be transformed into a mandala of miraculous activity. Each one is an opportunity. My advice to you is to always choose that which will bring ultimate result. You can't take it with you. It won't bring you any happiness if you leave it laying around. The choices that we need to make are the ones that bring about the ultimate result of liberation for all sentient beings. I'm not pinning any medals on myself because I really think this is more about logic than it is about good qualities. But the choice that I have made is to have my life be a vehicle by which practice can be brought to others. So I'm trying to make this temple. The temple is yours. It's not for me. I've had temples before. I don't really need any more. Really, I could practice in a cave. It's okay. I don't need a temple. This is yours. So we're creating a temple where you can practice, and there's a place of pilgrimage here where you can receive the blessings that would normally be unavailable to you. The method now has become available to you. The associate teachings have become available to you. The techniques by which your mind is ripened and liberated, this has become available to you. This is what I thought was important. I looked around and I could see that there was uncountable suffering. And it seemed to me that it was because of spiritual disease. And so that's what my choice has been. It has not been an easy choice, I'll tell you that. The worst thing you can do for me, the thing I hate the most, even though you wouldn't think that because I seem to be able to speak publicly, at least semi-coherently, I don't like to be in the public eye at all. I'm really a hermit by nature. I would love to be, I want to be alone. That's the truth. If you look down around by my house, you'll see my personality. Keep out, private. There are all these signs around there. I'm just so scared somebody's going to go beyond that fence. It's just personality-wise, it's just not my favorite thing. My favorite thing would be to live actually in the country on a farm somewhere, living a very natural life. That would be my happy thing. But I have decided that there are many more sentient beings than just me, the one. And so the best thing to do is to make as many happy as possible. And so I thought that the best thing to do would be to bring this to the world, to try to propagate the Buddhist teachings in whatever way possible, particularly to bring it to the West, to speak to Westerners who are not comfortable with the Buddhist teaching, who live in a materialistic society and may not understand very easily. I thought maybe I could explain it pretty well in a way that's good for Westerners. So that's been my decision, and it's based on logic and reason, actually. Logically, I can see that all sentient beings are suffering and that they are suffering from spiritual dis-ease, that they wish to be happy, but they do not know the method for happiness. And that even in the case of my own happiness, I have discovered that I cannot be happy without you. If I know that you are suffering in samsara, then so am I. I know that because I cannot be separate from you. So logically, this is what I have to do. And that's how I made those decisions. They are scary. I don't always like to live with the consequences of them. I'm not always happy with that. But ultimately, I have lived long enough to see many of the students around me move from hopeless, neurotic, addictive, compulsive, obsessive activity into activity that works toward the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. People that once were miserable are now living productive lives, purposeful and joyful because they know they are bringing benefit to others. I've seen the transformation in myself, and it's worth it. So I'm talking to you sort of like person to person, eyeball to eyeball. This is what I went through. This is what you will have to go through. Do it well. These choices are precious to you. They're like little gurus appearing in your life in a way. The choices you make will teach you about yourself. Learn. When you see yourself reflected in your choices, learn. When you make bad choices, back up, make them again. Learn and transform your life into a vehicle for happiness. So that's, since it's getting late and everybody must be getting hungry, myself included, maybe we should go ahead and stop our teaching for today. Whether you are a Buddhist practitioner or simply considering to be a Buddhist, or maybe not even considering to be a Buddhist, only here just to hear what's going on, I hope that you can take this bit of information and incorporate it into your life somehow. We have enough meaningless, inconsequential lives that are about selfishness in the world, don't we? Look, read the paper, read anything, look around, and you'll see that's what the content of many lives, most lives, actually is. Let's do something different. So now we'll have the closing prayers.